Hello everyone, I'm bringing you a video today prompted by a comment over on the Mannequin of the Month video for December, which is obviously looking at the kit of a trooper in 1st Royal Tank Regiment, the winter of 1944. In that video I mentioned that the black beret was not only worn by the Royal Tank Regiment during the Second World War, but also by regiments of the Royal Armoured Corps, and in fact by the Guards Armoured Division as well. I didn't mention that in the Mannequin of the Month video, but I'm mentioning it here. So what I wanted to do here was make a video talking a bit about the black beret. We'll have a look at an example and run through the extension of its wear, the extension of the authority to wear this beret to units of the Royal Armoured Corps and Guards Armoured Division during the course of the Second World War. There was a progressive extension of those who were authorised to wear the black beret, and it was not only worn by the Royal Tank Regiment. The comment made stated that the Royal Tank Regiment only wore the black beret, and that Royal Armoured Corps regiments wore the blue beret. The blue beret, as we'll get onto later, is actually a post-war thing. I thought this was fairly common knowledge, and it probably is. A lot of people watching this video who know this already, but obviously this comment was from someone who didn't know, so I thought I'd clarify and run over the details of this and how wear of the black beret was extended to other troops other than the Royal Tank Regiment during the Second World War, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So this video is obviously primarily aimed at talking about the introduction of the black beret and then the extension of its use during the course of the Second World War. But I thought I'd dig out an example to have a look at. And this particular example is dated 1945, and I've put an appropriate cap badge on it for the sort of topic we're talking about, which is the extension of the wear of the black beret to the Royal Armoured Corps during the course of the Second World War. So we have the cap badge of the 107th Regiment Royal Armoured Corps. This will probably be recognised by most as an infantry cap badge, and we'll get on to the cap badge of an infantry regiment, the King's Own, and we'll get on to a little bit more detail regarding that in a minute or two. First of all, I'll mention the introduction of the black beret, pretty much in the form we see it here, though this is a late Second War example or immediate post-war example. The black beret was introduced for use by the Royal Tank Corps in March of 1924, and this basically was the end result of discussions during the earlier 1920s regarding replacement of the service dress cap for use by the Royal Tank Corps, basically something which was a bit more practical to use within the confines of a tank, and certainly French practice was quite an inspiration regarding the choice of the beret, though this doesn't really follow patterns of French beret that were being used at the time by any French forces, armoured troops or otherwise. It's something quite distinct to the British Army, and of course the beret would then go on to be used in different colours and different forms. The use of it would expand greatly during the course of the Second World War, of course, but the Royal Tank Regiment were definitely, the Royal Tank Corps, later the Royal Tank Regiment, were of course the pioneers in introducing the beret into the British Army. And it is indeed a practical headdress, a practical form of headdress for use in tanks, particularly when wearing headsets and things of that nature. Later, of course, helmets and crash helmets and so forth would be introduced, the Royal Armoured Corps pattern helmet, but that would be further down the line. The beret, therefore, was used by the Royal Tank Regiment at the beginning of the Second World War. However, there was a large sort of reorganisation of the British Army, resulting in the conversion of cavalry and yeomanry units initially to an armoured role, both in armoured cars and in tanks. And then later infantry battalions, some infantry battalions were converted to Royal Armoured Corps regiments as well. And the use of the black beret was progressively extended to Royal Armoured Corps regiments and the Guards Armoured Division as well, of course. Guardsmen were also converted to armoured units. So that's something to note, and I will bring in the reference here, which is very useful, which is Brian L. Davis's book, British Army Uniforms and Insignia of World War II, which I have reviewed on the channel previously. Superb work. If you don't have a copy, you really should if you're interested in the British Army of the Second World War, particularly the development of uniforms and insignia. It really is an excellent reference book in that regard. And we have here, in the section detailing berets, a section which specifically deals with the extension of wear, the black beret, to Royal Armoured Corps troops. And you can see here at the start, the question of the most suitable type of headdress for wear by RIC units had been under consideration since the beginning of the war. When the units were initially converted to tank and armoured car units, the troops wore the standard field service cap for a time, but this was not really practical. And again, the question of a practical headdress became paramount. And in November of 1941, 19th November 1941 specifically, ACI 2276 laid out the extension of the wear of the Black Beret to cavalry and yeomanry units for the Royal Armoured Corps, and you can see details of that here. Obviously, if you wish to pause and read through this section here, please do. Obviously, hopefully the video will be clear enough for you to be able to do that if you pause. But we have details of that here. In armoured fighting vehicles, in tanks, all personnel of the RAC were to wear the crash helmet. Photographs show this wasn't always the case, but it was policy. In armoured fighting vehicles other than tanks, on all occasions when on duty, all cavalry units except the 11th Hussars, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and yeomanry regiments were to wear the black beret as then authorised for the Royal Tank Regiment. The 11th Hussars had their own beret already. They actually had a brown beret and were to continue wearing that. It's a practical headdress for wear in armoured vehicles, so there was no reason to change. However, when not on duty, personnel of cavalry and yeomanry regiments were allowed to continue to wear the coloured field service cap as first provided for by ACI 466 of 1940. So there were specific coloured service caps which could be worn, a bit of esprit de corps there, and they were permitted to continue wearing them when not on duty. Introduction of the black beret for wear by personnel of the Guards Armoured Division followed on the 26th of November 1941. ACI 2338 allowed this. So regiments of foot guards serving in the Guards Armoured Division to wear a cap, the official term used at this time to refer to the black beret, of the pattern prescribed for the Royal Tank Regiment when on duty in tanks when the crash helmet was not being worn. It was also to be worn for performing maintenance duties connected with tanks. The regimental badge was worn in front of the cap. You notice that down here we have an extension in January 1942 for personnel of the Divisional Headquarters, Brigade Headquarters, the Household Cavalry Armoured Car Regiment and Armoured Battalions serving in the Guards Armoured Division. And that's dated 17th of January 1942. So this basically extends the use of the black beret to both the Royal Armoured Corps troops and the Guards Armoured Division. And photographs certainly show that infantry battalions converted to Royal Armoured Corps regiments also wore the black beret, and we have an example of that here. Oops, knocked the camera on my way back with the book there. We have an example of that here with 107th Regiment Royal Armoured Corps, which was converted from the 5th Territorial Battalion of the King's Own Royal Lancaster Regiment. So you end up with the Royal Armoured Corps, the black beret being worn as a regiment of the Royal Armoured Corps, with the Infantry Regiment cap badge, the King's Own, but chromed. And you can see that here, it's actually in sort of a white metal finish. There are numerous examples of these, some in the collection of the King's Own Museum and 107th Regiment Royal Armoured Corps. This was what they wore on their black berets. A bit of esprit de corps again, carrying on the regimental sort of roots there, even though they'd been converted to a regiment of the Royal Armoured Corps. They wore the Royal Armoured Corps shoulder title, but they wore their regimental cap badge. Some units would wear the Royal Armoured Corps cap badge, quite a few, but some would hang on to their, even infantry battalions converted to armoured regiments, or tank regiments, would hold on to their cap badges in some instances. And this is one example of that. And 107th Regiment Royal Armoured Corps, formerly 5th Battalion of the King's Own, were crewing Churchill tanks, so they're a tank battalion crewing Churchill tanks. Obviously infantry support, basically, rather than being an armoured regiment. They were a tank regiment, tank battalion. So, have a look at the beret in a bit more detail now. Obviously you have the ventilation eyelets at the side here, a leather sweatband with a tape within, a ribbon which could be tied off at the back to adjust the size slightly, lined, as you can see here, with a black cotton leather reinforcement for the eyelets there on the inside, as you can see. And this particular example was made by Supac Manufacturing Company Limited. You can see that stamp there. Size 7 1/8. We have the government arrow there, the War Department stamp at the top there, and the date of 1945. And this is typical of the Supac stamps. You have the two stitched squares or two stitched diamonds in the crown of the beret there, with the outer one having the dotted white line. Typical markings for a Supac beret. This one is a little bit of damage to it here and there. I've lost the cap badge out of there. Find the hole for that again. There we go. There are several holes made in this, so over time a little bit of a moth nibble along the edge of the crown there, unfortunately. But this was a very nice find on Preston Market for not much money quite a few years ago now. So it's very nice from that point of view. It's lovely when you find something locally that's just in with a stack of other berets, and yeah, it was a good pickup, even though it does have a little bit of damage to it. It's nice to have one with a very late war or immediate post-war date, have an original Royal Tank Regiment, Royal Armoured Corps beret. So, as I say, a quick look at that. Talked about the specifics of the cap badge here in that particular Royal Armoured Corps regiment, and a little bit of general history of the beret and its introduction into the Royal Armoured Corps, having been used by the Royal Tank Regiment prior to that. So, as I say, a bit of World War II, primarily World War II history of the Black Beret there, and hopefully it's been interesting looking at this and talking a little bit about its history. So I hope you found it interesting. I've made more videos than I perhaps expected talking about berets. Obviously the changing shape of berets. We've talked about the airborne beret previously as well, how during the Second War it was a divisional headdress, certainly wasn't linked to any sort of parachute qualification historically, and officially still isn't. So as I say, just from that point of view, I've ended up talking about berets specifically more than I expected on the channel, rather than just looking at them in videos, looking at examples of them, talking about sort of the details of their wear and so forth has been covered in more detail than I ever thought it might be. But hopefully this video has been interesting, talking a little bit about the Black Beret specifically, and as I say, hopefully it's been informative. If you have found this interesting and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. A massive thank you to all of you. Thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address in the description as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.